All right, so we're diving into a topic today that I think you'll find pretty fascinating: animal dreams.
Yeah.
You and all of our listeners are no strangers to the complexities of animal cognition, so we've put together a really cool mix of research
Yeah.
for you guys today. We're going to be talking about cutting-edge studies, philosophical interpretations, even some really interesting anecdotes,
Right.
all about animal dreams.
Right.
The big question that we're going to try to tackle today
Yeah.
is, do animals dream?
Mm.
And if they do, what does that tell us about their consciousness?
So one of the things that's interesting about this is how much the field has shifted.
Okay.
For a long time, the scientific community was really hesitant to even consider animal minds.
Right.
And this was especially true from like the 1900s to the 1980s.
Oh, wow.
There was a real aversion to attributing complex mental states to animals.
Wow.
Donald Griffin, he actually called this mentophobia.
Mentophobia.
Yeah.
That sounds like it would be
A real barrier to understanding animal cognition if you're afraid to even think about it.
Yeah, it absolutely was.
Yeah.
Research into animal emotions, language, and of course, dreaming was practically taboo.
Wow.
It was seen as anthropomorphizing, scientifically unsound.
So the very notion that animals might dream was just kind of dismissed during this time.
Yeah, for about a century, we call it the silent century,
Oh, wow.
because it was considered so unscientific to even entertain the idea.
So it sounds like things have changed pretty dramatically since then. Now we have all the scientific evidence to work with.
Exactly.
Right?
And we can kind of break that evidence down into three categories:
All right.
electrophysiological, behavioral, and neuroanatomical.
Okay, so let's start with electrophysiological evidence.
Okay.
I immediately think of those groundbreaking studies with zebra finches.
Mm-hmm.
They actually learn songs
Right.
while they sleep.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So Amish Dave and Daniel Margoliouth.
Found that the neural activity patterns in zebra finches' brains during sleep actually mirrored those seen when they sing while they're awake. It's like they're mentally rehearsing.
Wow.
Like a soundless song is playing in their sleep.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And, while there's debate on whether this is simply computational processing or a genuine subjective experience, it's still, the parallels are really striking.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that actually gets at this question of phenomenology. Like, what is the actual subjective experience of the animal?
Right. And it's not just birds either. There's also that research with rats replaying their maze experiences in their dreams.
Yes, the rat replay studies.
Yes.
So Louis and Wilson, they found that rats actually replayed their maze runs during sleep,
Wow.
both forward and backward, like mental time travel.
That's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So it really challenges it, like the way that we think about these creatures and what they're capable of.
Yeah, it really does. And again, those findings really point to this idea that maybe there is a phenomenologically rich dream world for these rats.
Okay, so let's move on to behavioral evidence.
Okay.
And this is where observing animals' behavior while they're sleeping can give us clues about their dream content. And I have to bring up Heidi the octopus.
Of course.
Her story is just so captivating.
So Heidi, she actually lived with a biologist, David Scheel.
Okay.
And he noticed that while she was sleeping, she would change colors and textures in ways that mirrored her hunting behaviors while she was awake.
Wow.
She'd shift from a calm white to a flashing yellow with orange blotches, very similar to what she would do when she spotted prey.
Wow.
Then she would turn a deep purple, as if she just made a kill.
It's hard to write that off as just like random muscle activity, right? The complexity and the context, it seems like it's pointing to something more.
Yeah, I agree. We have to consider the totality of the behavior, not just, one isolated thing.
Right, and there's research with cuttlefish, too,
Yeah.
showing color changes during sleep that resemble waking behaviors.
Yeah, but what's interesting is that the researchers in that study remained agnostic.
Agnostic.
Yeah, about whether these cuttlefish were actually experiencing dreams.
But, we see creatures like Heidi seemingly acting out these hunts in their sleep. So why were they agnostic?
Well, they argued that without tracking all the physiological arousal variables, they couldn't definitively claim that the cuttlefish were having subjective experiences.
Okay, but there's lots of research, though, on arousal in animals
Right.
during REM sleep, right?
Absolutely.
So doesn't that suggest that there is like a felt experience happening?
Absolutely. I mean, studies show heart rate and blood pressure spikes in animals during REM sleep, and that's often associated with vivid dreams in humans.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a strong case to be made, I think, for
Yeah.
a link between those physiological markers and dream experiences,
Right.
even in creatures like cuttlefish.
Yeah, it seems like the science is catching up to what many of us kind of intuitively feel when we see our pets
Yeah.
twitching or vocalizing
Right.
in their sleep, you know?
Exactly.
And speaking of vocalization, there's also that really interesting research on chimpanzees using sign language in their sleep.
Great.
So Kimberly McCoby,
Mm-hmm.
she observed chimps who'd been taught American Sign Language.
Yeah.
And they were making hand gestures
Yeah.
during their sleep as if they were talking in their dreams.
Right.
So potential communication in like symbolic language while asleep.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty compelling.
It is. And again, it's very difficult to definitively prove they were dreaming, but the context of their sleep signing, no intended recipient, their eyes are closed, their breathing is regular, all of that strongly suggests a dream state.
So it seems like with every study that we talk about here,
Mm-hmm.
it adds like another layer of complexity to this whole idea of animal dreaming.
Yeah.
So let's kind of shift gears and move on to neuroanatomical evidence.
Okay.
So what can the structure of animal brains tell us about their capacity to dream?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that leads us to Michel Jouvet's research on cats.
Okay.
So he really offers, I think, some of the most powerful insights here. He focused on REM sleep atonia. This is the paralysis that prevents us from acting out our dreams.
Yeah.
So what he did was he deactivated the neural mechanisms responsible for this atonia in cats.
So they could move freely during REM sleep.
Exactly.
What happened?
Well, they began exhibiting all these really interesting behaviors like hunting, fighting, even though there was no actual prey or threat present.
Wow.
So they were literally acting out their
Wow.
dreams.
Remarkable, like a window into their secret world.
Exactly. And so Jouvet concluded that these actions, while they were meaningless in the context of, their actual surroundings, they were part of this complex dream narrative unfolding in their minds.
And when we consider that a lot of animals, especially mammals, share brain structures similar to those involved in human dreaming.
Yeah, it really strengthens the argument that they dream too. Now, pinpointing exactly which animals dream, that remains a complex question.
Right.
But the evidence, particularly for mammals, is very compelling.
So all this talk about dream narratives and mental time travel, it really makes me think about, the bigger question here. If animals are dreaming, what does that tell us about their consciousness?
That is the million-dollar question, and that's what we're going to explore next.
Okay, so we've gone over some pretty compelling evidence that animals do dream. But what does that mean for our understanding of consciousness?
Well, it really challenges, I think, a lot of our assumptions about non-human minds.
Yeah, how do we even begin to define consciousness in animals? Especially when we're dealing with something as elusive as dreams.
Right. Yeah, it's a really tricky thing. One helpful framework, though, is what's called the SAM model.
SAM model.
Yeah.
Okay, break that down for me. What is that?
So SAM stands for subjective, affective, and meta-conscious.
Okay.
So subjective consciousness is the experience of being the subject of your experiences, like the "this is happening to me" feeling.
Okay.
Affective consciousness involves experiencing emotions like joy, fear, sadness.
Okay.
And then meta-consciousness is the ability to reflect on your own mental state, like to think about thinking.
Okay, so would you say that dreaming would imply at least some level of subjective consciousness in animals?
Absolutely. To dream, you need to have a world that is being presented to you, the subject.
Right.
And so that's subjective consciousness.
And what about emotions? We've talked about rats seemingly dreaming of rewards, and even things like elephants and chimps having nightmares.
Right.
Does that indicate affective consciousness?
Yeah, I think that those are really strong indicators of affective consciousness. I mean, we know that dreams are very emotionally charged for humans.
Yeah.
And the evidence suggests that animals experience a range of emotions in their dreams as well.
So if we're seeing subjective and affective consciousness in dreaming animals, is there any chance that they could also have like a glimmer of metaconsciousness? Could they be aware
Yeah.
that they're dreaming?
That's a really interesting question. Lucid dreaming in animals is still very much debated.
Right. I can imagine that would be hard to
Yeah.
study.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard enough for humans
Right.
to achieve lucidity, let alone, figure out if animals are doing it. But there is some scientific basis to consider it. Some researchers have proposed the concept of alucidity.
Lucidity. Okay.
Yeah, and that refers to an awareness of the dream state without the cognitive control to actually manipulate it.
Oh, okay. So it's like they're not necessarily able to change their dream like a human lucid dreamer can,
Right.
but maybe they just have this kind of sense of like, oh, this is a dream.
Exactly. Yeah. And we also have to remember that we're constantly learning more about animal metacognition, their awareness
Right.
of their own mental states.
Right. Like primates understanding death
Right.
or animals using deception,
Yeah.
which implies that they understand another individual's mental state.
Exactly, yeah. So the fact that we are seeing metacognition in animals while they're awake makes this possibility of alucidity during dreams even more intriguing.
Okay. So it sounds like the SAM model is suggesting that dreaming animals experience a world, they feel emotions,
Mm.
and potentially even possess, a very rudimentary awareness of the dream state.
Mm-hmm.
So where does philosophy fit into all of this?
Well, I think one of the key philosophical questions that this raises is whether we prioritize computational models of the mind
Sure.
or the phenomenological experience.
Okay, so computational versus phenomenological.
Yeah.
Could you maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So computationalism views the brain as essentially a biological computer
Okay.
that processes information via algorithm. Phenomenology, on the other hand, is really about understanding the subjective lived experience.
Okay, so would it be fair to say that computationalism might argue that the zebra finch is simply replaying a song, like without actually subjectively experiencing it? Whereas phenomenology would say, no, the finch is actually feeling something
Exactly.
during that replay.
You got it. And, when it comes to animal dreams, I think the phenomenological perspective is absolutely crucial.
Why is that?
Because, if we reduce animals to just information processors, we risk overlooking the richness of their inner lives and
Yeah.
dreams with their, sensory vividness.
And their emotional depth.
Yeah.
I think they're prime examples of phenomenal consciousness.
Right. So it's not just about what the brain is doing, but it's about, like, what it's like to be that animal, to experience the world through their senses, their emotions.
Exactly. And dreams offer us a window into that world.
Yeah.
A world that's potentially far more complex than we ever imagined.
It's a real shift from seeing animals as, like, biological machines
Right.
to recognizing them as, like, fellow subjects,
Yeah,
each with their own unique experiences.
exactly.
So before we move on, I want to touch on this idea of imagination that we've kind of been dancing around. We mentioned primate pretend play earlier.
Right?
How does imagination connect to dreaming in animals?
That's a great question. And it goes back to this idea of the zoological imagination.
Mm-hmm.
Imagination isn't something that's uniquely human. It exists throughout the animal kingdom.
Right. And we're seeing evidence of that
Yeah.
in Heidi the octopus, the signing chimps, even the rats replaying those mazes. Exactly, yeah. And it goes beyond just dreams. Think about Pembanisha, the ape who pretended to eat blueberries from a photo.
Wow.
Or the chimp, Jokro, whose mother carried her deceased daughter's body as if she were still alive.
Wow. That's both heartbreaking and kind of illuminating, right?
Yeah.
It suggests a real depth of emotional experience
Hmm.
and imaginative capacity that maybe we wouldn't expect.
Yeah, and those kinds of examples really challenge, I think, the traditional human-animal divide
Yeah.
when it comes to imagination.
So instead of this rigid divide, we're recognizing more of a continuum of
Yeah.
imaginative abilities.
Exactly. And dreams, with their boundless creativity and their
Yeah.
often surreal narratives, they might actually be the most striking examples of this zoological imagination at work.
It's incredible to think of all these different creatures out there experiencing these internal dream worlds filled with their own images, emotions, maybe even like a sense of me
Yeah.
navigating that landscape.
It really does underscore the importance of approaching the study of animals with humility and a willingness to revise our assumptions, And we're going to delve even further into this fascinating intersection of dreams, imagination, and animal consciousness in the next part of our deep dive.
It's really mind-boggling when you start to think about the implications of this zoological imagination,
Yeah.
especially when we think about the ethical dimension.
Absolutely. I think if animals are dreaming, if they're experiencing emotions, if they're potentially even imagining, it really forces us to look at
Yeah.
our ethical responsibilities towards them.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that some researchers were hesitant to acknowledge the possibility of cuttlefish dreaming,
Yeah.
even when the behavioral evidence was pretty compelling.
Right.
Why do you think there's this resistance to attributing complex mental states to animals?
I think part of it might be, a lingering fear of anthropomorphism,
Mm.
but I think as we've seen, the science is revealing all of these really striking similarities. Yeah.
In brain activity and behavior across species, and that's challenging those assumptions.
It's almost as if we're like clinging to this idea of human exceptionalism, this belief that we are somehow fundamentally different
Right.
from every other living thing on this planet.
Yeah, and that exceptionalism has historically been used to justify all sorts of practices that
Uh-huh.
cause harm to animals.
But the research that we've been talking about today, especially on dreaming,
Yeah.
really suggests otherwise.
Right.
It points to this continuum of consciousness,
Hmm.
this shared capacity for experience that extends beyond our species.
Yeah, and maybe the most intimate and vulnerable expression of that shared capacity is dreaming.
Yeah.
In dreams, I think the walls between species really seem to dissolve, and it reveals this common language of
Right.
emotions and sensations and imagination.
So where do we go from here? How do we integrate this understanding of animal dreaming into our scientific endeavors and our interactions with other species? Well, I think it begins with acknowledging their experiences, recognizing them as fellow dreamers, fellow inhabitants of
Yeah.
this planet. And I think we need more research that embraces the phenomenological perspective,
Yeah.
research that seeks to understand the subjective experience of animals, not just what their brains are doing, but what it's like to be them.
What kind of research would you like to see done
Yeah.
to explore these questions further?
Well, I think we need more studies that combine behavioral observation with neuroimaging techniques
Okay.
that would allow us to correlate, brain activity with dreamlike behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
I also think we need to develop more sophisticated methods for studying animal communication,
Okay.
maybe even trying to tap into their
Yeah.
dream content.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty fascinating to think about all the possibilities here. Decoding animal dreams could really revolutionize our understanding of their cognitive abilities and
Yeah.
their inner worlds.
Absolutely. And by understanding their dreams, we might even gain deeper insights into the nature of consciousness itself
Yeah.
across species. After all, we're all part of this interconnected web of life, sharing this planet,
Yeah.
and perhaps even sharing a common dream of existence.
Well, that's a beautiful thought to end on.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the fascinating world of animal dreams. It's a topic that I think really makes us question our place in the natural world and rethink our relationships with our fellow creatures.
Absolutely.
And for all of you listening out there, we hope this has sparked your curiosity. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep dreaming big. Until next time.